Today, executives of a voting machine company were indicted for bribing election officials in the Philippines. Blaze News investigative journalist Steve Baker has a startling new finding about the would-be Trump assassin. And Donald Trump has made his grand return to X after over 3 years of silence. We have all those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Monday, August 12th. Remember all the controversy surrounding election integrity back in 2020? Well, Smartmatic is a voting machine company, and they are currently being sued by Fox and Newsmax for defamation due to their coverage around the 2020 election. Last week, a grand jury indicted 2 Smartmatic executives who are accused of participating in a $1 million money laundering scheme that bribed Philippine election officials back from 2015 to 2018. So here to break it all down for us is James Poulos, BlazeTV host of Zero Hour, and J. Michael Waller, senior analyst for strategy and the Center for Policy and author of Big Intel: How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us again. And let's just start at the beginning. What can you tell us about these Smartmatic executives and why they've been indicted?
Well, these Smartmatic executives were the co-founders of the software company that made the vote counting software to elect Hugo Chavez as dictator of Venezuela and turn Venezuela, which was a friendly country, into an ally of Russia, Cuba, Communist China, and Iran.
Yeah, it's really a crazy story. And so, even beyond just the domestic layer of it, you've got this international angle. How do you think that this is going to spread from a story that has to do with a couple guys in the U.S. mucking around in Venezuela to something with broader implications?
A lot broader implications, because this machinery was set up with the help of the Cuban intelligence service, which is, we underestimate them, but they're one of the best. They're like the East German Stasi used to be in terms of quality. So you have these different services that are allied with this regime that's backed, even financially backed, this software company whose software went into other machines, and there's a whole lot of subterfuge involved. And this is the software that rigged certain elections. And we just saw in Venezuela how when it didn't work as planned, the client lost.
So how does that come back then here to the United States?
Well, right now, Smartmatic machines are only used in Los Angeles County, as far as I know, but their software is the DNA of other vote counting software in other states. And if you look at the states from 2020, where you had these anomalies, just like you did exactly in Venezuela, where the voting machines would stop, the counting would stop, and they'd come back on late at night, and then there'd be this pop in the losing votes would suddenly become the leading votes, and then those areas would win. And it's all forensically provable because the software and the images of the ballots match up with the vote counts. So that this is something that these machines, or the software in these machines, are capable of doing to rig elections. And it's going to happen all over again this year.
Well, let's look at the politics of it. I mean, obviously, you can see how this kind of technology could be used to throw an election. But theoretically, both sides have a way of presenting this information as part of the message they're trying to get across to their voters, mobilize their base, paint a picture of what November is going to look like, and hopefully not drive everyone totally insane in the process. So how does this shake out, Democrats versus Republicans? Who has the biggest rhetorical weapon here as a result of all this news?
Well, I don't think the Republicans are doing a very good job at it. The Democrats are doing a much better job at messaging, where they're saying that we need to defend democracy. This is the electronic means are every vote is provable, every vote is counted, and so forth, and this is the best way to do it. The Republicans don't really have a good comeback for this, except in the House you have a new piece of legislation to prevent illegal aliens from voting, and thereby remove a lot of those bodies, because it's not the actual people whose votes are counted, it's the number of people and the number of votes that are counted. So there's a concern out there that it doesn't matter who votes, it matters that the number of votes matches up to the number of voters to get a credible amount of ballots. This is a big concern. I'm not a voting machine expert in this way. I'm just looking at the concerns and looking at the advocates of these machines tend to be the very politicians who are in tune ideologically with the creators of the machinery and who have used these machines to their benefit in the past.
Yeah,
Don't want paper ballots.
whether it's either the Republicans or Democrats, it doesn't really matter. But we are here today. And why is it that the DOJ is releasing the news now? Is the timing of this release a little suspicious to you?
Yes, that's a big mystery because this case has gone on for quite a while. This is not against Smartmatic, the company. This is against the president and chief operating officer and a co-founder and the second largest known shareholder and the brother-in-law of the chairman and CEO. I've tried to reach out to him, the chairman and CEO. His name is Antonio Mujica. He is unresponsive, but it's his brother-in-law. Those were the two of the four that were busted. Now, interestingly, the federal announcement of the grand jury indictment did not mention Smartmatic at all. It was almost as if they were trying to sweep Smartmatic's name under the rug. We don't know why the news was released right into the campaign like this a week before the Democrat convention, but it could be a payback from Biden loyalists in the White House, maybe Hunter, who works in the White House, maybe Dr. Jill, and Attorney General Garland, who are paying back Obama and the Obama machine for dumping Biden as the presidential nominee this year.
You know, there's been a push in some quarters to kind of roll back some of this election or voting machine technology. Some people arguing, you know, look, it's got to be something simpler, something less susceptible to abuse and manipulation. Do you think those kinds of movements, that kind of change to the election law, is something that's going to be fueled or reinforced by what we're seeing playing out now?
I think so. It can't be, and it shouldn't be done at the national level. This should all be left up to the states and communities to do. But the fact is that the states like Texas are using voting machines. I don't think they should. I think it's a danger for states to be using these because it can flip elections in high density, small geographic sized jurisdictions in these states. So I think if states revert back to paper ballots like we've always had before, you're not going to have these problems of trusting everything up to a foreign created software with help of the Cuban intelligence service to be running our election technology.
I want to switch gears with you. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are having their conversation right now, but the European Union wanted to jump in here earlier today and demand that Elon censor Donald Trump. What's your take on just this situation and how it's played out throughout the day?
Well, this is part of a transnational socialist movement that relies on censorship to grow and to prosper. So here you have our allies our NATO allies within the European Union, who we are defending with our nuclear umbrella, coming here now and interfering in our elections so that their kindred spirits can win our elections. This is unprecedented. It's really crazy, and I think it really I'm a big supporter of the NATO alliance, but not if it's going to become the armed wing of some transnational socialist movement. So there's a big danger, a huge national security danger to all of this.
It certainly is unprecedented, and it appears, at least for now, that Elon Musk is taking some steps which for him are also unprecedented. Wall Street Journal, I think, is reporting that he has blocked off about an hour a week at least to focus on driving turnout on behalf of the Trump campaign or for the sake of getting voters lined up for Trump. He definitely had already came straight out of the gate with very negative response to these EU claims that he needs to somehow censor himself or shut down or edit parts of this interview, or else he's going to be in hot water with the EU. Are we in the process of seeing Elon Musk emerge as really the pivotal central figure in how information is going to be managed and used and opened up to regular citizens as we head toward November?
Yeah. What you're seeing here is it's a battle for free speech in our country, free speech around the world, and then for other foreign countries to be able to impose censorship on Americans. And the one man, the greatest, wealthiest man in the world standing up against this is Elon Musk. So he really, look at what he's saying, look at his policies on X. They're completely for free speech. Everyone else wants to censor.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. J. Michael Waller, thank you so much for joining us and helping us break all of this stuff down tonight. When we come back, were CIA agents present on January 6th? Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch, will join us to talk about the lawsuit he filed. Up next. Judicial Watch filed a federal lawsuit seeking to force the CIA to disclose any involvement in the January 6th Capitol riot. Here to break this all down with us is Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. So, Tom, thanks for joining us today. Let's start with the beginning. Why did you guys file this lawsuit, and where do you want it to go?
Well, we had gotten documents not too long ago, surprisingly, frankly, showing that the CIA had teams there who were responding, if I recall correctly, to the alleged pipe bombs found near the RNC and DNC, and they had other folks on standby. This was astonishing news to us. We didn't know the CIA had operators deployed on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. And I'm sure it's a surprise to Americans that the CIA was conducting law enforcement activities here in America. And so we followed up with a comprehensive FOIA request for records about what the CIA was doing at the Capitol on January 6th. We got the proverbial hand to the face, so we've sued in federal court for the records.
Well, obviously, CIA is not supposed to be running around doing here what it's supposed to do overseas. But on the other hand, at the time, I had the feeling of like any intelligence agency in the world that doesn't have at least one guy sort of hanging around a lamppost, keeping an eye on what's going on, probably the head of that agency deserves to be fired. So not all that surprising to find out CIA is involved, but, they can't be too happy about disclosing any of this information. They're always notoriously tight-lipped. What if they just don't reply?
Well, they have to respond, and that's the wonderful thing about the FOIA law and the American system, the legal system. We go into court, and the CIA now has a month or two to respond to our lawsuit, and they have to tell court what documents they have, or if they don't even want to look for the documents, what would be the basis for that, which is an argument the CIA likes to use. We can't even tell you if we have documents one way or the other. But to me, this is more of a straightforward request. It doesn't talk about foreign intelligence and things like that. Obviously, we're not going to get, the keys to the kingdom in that regard. But law enforcement personnel working for the CIA on the ground on January 6th, certainly that ought to be disclosable or disclosed to the American people, the details of that.
You're looking for details of 6 different areas involved in your lawsuit. Can you go into just some of the details that you're looking for?
Oh, you're going to have them in front of you, and I don't have them in front of me.
There's shots fired inside the Capitol, a person shot inside the Capitol, requests for CIA support or assistance to the Capitol, bomb technicians, and accelerating or explosive canine devices, and any after-action reports about January 6th events in Washington, D.C. So why are all of those different areas mentioned?
Because those are the areas that we think the CIA was likely to be involved in. And given the prior documents we have, certainly with the explosive devices that were found, that was really specific to the CIA. And after action reports, that's the sort of document that's created by law enforcement when they're involved in situations such as the January 6th disturbances. So all of this is basic information that would be provided by any other law enforcement agency or any other federal law enforcement agency. And again, I'm still scratching my head why we're even using or talking about the CIA in the context of domestic law enforcement activity.
As you know, Tom, there's been a lot of scuttlebutt in and around D.C. these days about that pipe bomb that was allegedly discovered. We're still, kind of trying to unravel that one. Do you think that that has any bearing on the kinds of documents that the CIA might have to furnish if indeed they're going to do so?
Well, it might be providing an excuse for them to not provide documents. The government likes to, if there's something is ongoing, they haven't figured out allegedly what happened yet, they pretend that documents about the response to the investigation and the investigation of it should be withheld from the public. In my view, These are documents that are aside from the ongoing investigation. And I tell you, if the CIA is involved in the ongoing investigation, boy, would that be news.
You said that they have about a month or so to respond. What are going to be the next legal steps in this case?
Well, typically the government will give the court reasons as to either a timeline to give us documents and explain the withholdings, or in the case of the CIA, sometimes they say we can't give them any documents at all or tell them one way or the other whether we have documents. So it's going to be interesting to see if they admit to having any documents, and then subsequently what the timeline for reviewing those documents and producing the releasable portions of which they should be producing to Judicial Watch.
I'm going to let you speculate here if you want, or at least make a little inference. DC, famous for its turf wars, the intelligence community no exception. If CIA was poking around down there, what other agencies or bureaus do you think were in the mix on that day?
Well, we know Homeland Security was through the Secret Service. We know the DC police were. The FBI has confessed to having people there on January 6th. We're suing separately, I know, for the DC police body cams. And then, of course, we still have the U.S. Capitol Police, another federal law enforcement agency that really doesn't have some of the basic transparency requirements most other federal and local and state law enforcement agencies do. I mean, for example, I mean, they still have emails they're sitting on from that day between the Capitol Police and the board that runs security there in the Capitol, and House and Senate and House members and senators. What's in those emails? So the question is, which agencies weren't involved? You have the Department of Interior, the Park Service. You would have thought there'd be a comprehensive investigation of all of that by the January 6th committee, but that was a rump committee designed to destroy Trump and scare anyone from questioning Biden's election. So they weren't interested in that much at all.
Tom, my last question for you is, we are almost up to the next election, and yet we are still trying to go back and figure out everything that's happening on January 6th, and people are still getting arrested. We're still trying to get all of these answers. We know government is notoriously slow at everything that they do, but why are we still waiting for answers from something that happened so long ago?
Well, the first answer is usually the best one. They're just slow. The second answer, it's politics. They don't want the documents to come out. Otherwise, we would have gotten them. The fact that they ignored the request completely illustrates that the CIA thinks they're above the law. And if I were the next president, the next honest president, I would go on a transparency tear and require all the agencies to disclose all this information and other information that the American people have been agitating now for years.
Well, Tom, thanks so much for joining us today, and best of luck with this lawsuit going forward.
Hey, thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Steve Baker will join us next and highlight what the DHS is hiding about that January 6th pipe bomb and update us on the Trump assassination attempt. That's coming up next. It's been almost a month since the Trump assassination attempt, and yet we still don't know why the shooter was able to get within range of the 45th president. Steve Baker, an investigative journalist for Blaze Media, is here to tell you what the FBI won't. So, Steve, you posted a photo of an undercover officer at Donald Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, and wrote on X, "Can there be any doubt as to why there was a Secret Service counter-sniper team deconfliction problem? Read, delay in taking the shot when you have a plainclothes officer on duty dressed almost identical to crooks." So can you explain some of the significance of what you found?
Well, we actually have found other, maybe we would call them counter surveillance operatives in the crowd. We don't know which agency they're working for. We'll get to that in a moment. Yep. But they're dressed similarly to Thomas Crooks, or was Thomas Crooks dressed similarly to them? That's the question. Because once he was on that roof, and by the way, he was on that roof for about 3.5 minutes by our estimation. fully erect, walking tall across that roof.
Yeah.
And if they knew that they had counter surveillance individuals in the crowd looking like him, those sniper teams had to deconflict.
And we have a series of images. I would love for you to walk us through some of these. As you're saying, he was able to stand up upright and walk across the roof.
He was able to stand up and walk across the roof for a couple of reasons. Number one, he looked like people they had as operatives in the crowd. The second reason is, if you can look at that circle right there at the very bottom, it's a long distance range. This was an actual officer's body cam from the Butler police. And what he saw, I don't know that he could see it with his own eyes, but what he captured on his body cam was the actual beginning of Thomas Crooks walking erect across that
That's
roof.
him in that
correct.
circle,
That's
standing
correct.
up, walking across.
That is him right there. And that we know that because we have spent,
Because you've looked at all the angles.
We spent the entire weekend looking at these, zooming in up close, watching it from all the angles. So we know that this is him. And of course, the Secret Service sniper teams that were on those two barns behind the stage, they had another problem. They had a tree blocking and obscuring their view. Even if they could see by the angles there, and you can see from this photo here, that tree that is circled, even if they could see him, they weren't sure, because counter sniper teams always operate in pairs, and they were concerned about whether his spotter may have been behind that tree. They didn't know whether they could take a shot or not and not be taking out one of their own.
Can you tell just how similar the attire is that we're talking about here?
It's almost identical. We're talking about white to almost white, cargo pants, knee length, and a rock and roll dark gray shirt.
Seems like not a coincidence, in other words.
Look, you have to go to coincidence. You have to go to incompetency before you go to malfeasance or conspiracies or anything else like that. But it's just layer upon layer upon layer.
But when you looked at that photo and you had tweeted it out earlier, you had noticed something that was a little different when you tried to figure out what agency this undercover plainclothes officer was a part of, and you had trouble figuring it out.
From the body cam that captured this undercover or plainclothes officer, what we saw was a badge that was hanging from his collar. And so I then found the most clear shot I could find of that badge, and then we zoomed in. And then we discovered from that zoomed angle that the badge had been completely obscured. It had been rubbed out, not physically, but with using Photoshop or some more video editing software. But they also distorted the shape of the badge. So because badges have different departments, different agencies have very distinctive shapes. So even if they had wiped off FBI or Secret Service or Washington County, township or whatever, if they had wiped that off, we could still identify the badge by the shape, but they actually went in and blackened out the edges of it so that we could not even identify the shape of the badge.
Yeah, the suspicious elements here to this story keep piling up, but we're still continuing to unearth new footage. New stuff is coming in, new information. I'm sure you've seen more. Give us a little taste of what's around the bend.
It's the same thing that we dealt with in January 6th. We had limited data in the early weeks, and then we had more and more as the months and the years wore on, and we're learning more about that. We're going to continue to learn more about this, but ultimately, there's a lot of things that have been edited out of this footage that Judicial Watch found. They got that through their FOIA request, and that's what we've been working from, myself and Joe Hanneman here with Blaze Media. So we've been working through that for several days now, and we're not only identifying the anomalies like this, but we're finding more and more of these selective edits in the video and in the audio.
Now, you and Joseph Hanneman already have a piece out on January 6th. You have an entire series basically on January 6th, but the latest one on blaze.com was the DNC pipe bomb planted while Kamala Harris was inside on January 6th. So what can you tell us about the latest here?
The most important thing that we have to understand about this particular incident, well, the two most important things. The first thing is that if the FBI would just release the entire quantity of the DNC security cameras. Now, I'm not talking about the Capitol CCTV cameras. We've already done multiple stories of how those were moved away and turned deliberately from the command center away from the investigative scene. But the DNC cameras that caught the alleged bomber on the evening of the 5th, a little after 7 o'clock, all they have to do is just give us 24 hours unrestricted access to that. We'll know when the bomb was placed. We'll know who placed it, because we never saw that guy actually place the bomb beside the bench. We believe that we may have found evidence that it was placed just 15 minutes before it was discovered, while then VP-elect Kamala Harris was inside that building.
You're finding images of badges being digitally effaced.
Yes.
Do you really think that if that videotape exists, that the FBI has, that they're going to cough it up? Or are they going to say, oh, we lost the tapes, they got destroyed, sorry about that?
Well, we know what they're going to say to begin with. They're going to say this is part of an ongoing investigation, and they're not going to give that to us. But the bottom line is, if they don't give it to us, they deserve all the conspiracy theories. They deserve all the ridicule that they can take. They deserve the derision from Congress members that bring them forward. And of course, the sternly worded letters that for what good those do. But the bottom line is they could solve the whole thing. There's nothing about that DNC video, by the way, that meets the standard of classified, highly sensitive, top secret in any way, shape, or form. All they have to do is release that, and then we see what the blind spot obscures from the Capitol CCTV across the street. We see exactly who and when placed that bomb.
So you said VP-elect Kamala Harris was in that building at the time, yet we heard AOC crying and saying, oh, my life was in danger, I could have died. Yet Kamala Harris, I don't recall her really making a big issue, that day, saying I was so close to this.
As of this date in August 2024, 3.5 years later, more than 3.5 years later, Kamala Harris has not uttered one single word or taken a single question from a complicit press about her presence inside that building that day. There's a reason for that.
What do you think she would say or will say when eventually that question is asked? I mean, with Elon Musk moving X in a direction that seems to be increasingly supportive of Donald Trump, or at least increasingly critical of the administration, it seems like only a matter of time before people start asking this very question.
Somebody's eventually going to ask her the question. Certainly somebody like me is never going to get access to Kamala Harris. Not likely anyway.
You're on too many lists.
I am already. And we are anticipating that when she is asked that question, because the DNC for the Democrats, as well as the RNC headquarters for the Republicans, are used for where they make their fundraising calls, because they can't make them from their offices legally otherwise. So they go to these buildings to do that. So we're going to hear that that's what she was doing. But this is the key. Her coronation was taking place inside the Capitol building in the House chamber at 1 o'clock on January 6th was when the session was called and the debate began and a vote was going to take place. But we know from this latest OIG investigative report that was released last week that she was scheduled to be in that building from 11:30 a.m. till 3:30 p.m. She was scheduled to miss the literal event that was going to make her the second most important person in the country.
Before we let you go, Steve, Donald Trump is set to sue the Justice Department for $100 million in damages over the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago back in 2022. We keep talking about events that shouldn't have happened or did happen, just the government overreach everywhere. So what's your take on Donald now coming out and trying to get $100 million here?
Well, he probably needs the $100 million considering what they've leached from him over the last several years in legal fees. But this is another example of, look, if the United States government was operating within the limits of the law itself, within the limits of the Constitution itself, even as recent Supreme Court rulings have elucidated for us, we would know that that event would not have taken place, shouldn't have taken place. And even though it wasn't a shootout at the Mar-a-Lago corral that day between the FBI and the United States Secret Service, it's an event that shouldn't happen. And you know what? He deserves as much compensation as anybody else who's been put through this by our federal government.
Steve Baker, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
When we come back, Chris Bedford dares to ask the question, what's going on in the Trump campaign? Just ahead. As the November election quickly approaches, parts of the Trump campaign appear to be MIA. At least that's what Chris Bedford, Blaze Media senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent, recently had written on theblaze.com. So, Chris, welcome back to the show. Now, what's going on right now inside the Trump campaign?
Well, there is a bit of turmoil inside the Trump campaign. They were slow at first to react to the pick of Kamala Harris, which is basically political malpractice. This was a very slow-moving coup against Joe Biden. It was certainly possible that Joe Biden was going to be the person that they ended up running against. That was what he wanted. But to not be prepared, to have the first real viral campaign ads start coming up from Republican Senate candidates before the campaign got on the air was just a really big missed opportunity for them. Now, since then, they've been blanketing airwaves, and sources I've spoken to have strongly suggested that the tactics that the campaign intends to pursue are to let these super PACs blanket the airwaves in the first few weeks and months of this campaign and let the campaign finish with more targeted attacks in the last few months in the battleground states that they're going at. Now, this would make sense. In 2020, they ran out of money in the final weeks after starting off very flashy. I think maybe you'll remember they even paid for a Super Bowl advertisement in the 2020 campaign, and they ended up wishing they had that cash at the end when they get the better rate. But another thing that's happening with the campaign that's been interesting, to say the least, is some of the infighting and some of the firing on its own lines. Now, there's plenty of reason why any campaign might want to separate itself from Project 2025, for example. There's no doubt that the folks at Heritage got over their skis on that, how much they were talking about it, how they were saying that this was the campaign's idea for how to administrate were they to win. But they got kind of vicious and extremely petty, even putting out on campaign letterheads signed by Susie Walz and Chris LaCivita, the two top campaign operatives, putting their names on this, attacking it, running op-eds in the Washington Times. It was overblown for attacking a bunch of former administration people. And then you had Chris LaCivita, who was one of the top guys, personally attacking Congressman Bob Good, who was the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, just lost a closely contested primary. Now, there's, of course, it's fairly normal to have infighting in any kind of state politics. They're both Virginia guys. That's not unusual. Bob Good didn't make friends left and right. That's not what he was known for. But when you have someone who had 32,000 conservative Republicans voting for them, it makes no sense to spend time attacking them on Twitter. So from the sources I've been talking to, and I have been a little bit out of it, happily not reading too much in depth or watching a lot of TV this past week, but texting with people and calling people, that the campaign is aware of this. They're trying to write this. There's even talk about bringing in some new talent and some fresh talent. And the Trump family in particular is really concerned, is going to be keeping a very close eye. And I think we saw the first real change in their tactics this past weekend when they finally debuted vice presidential nominee JD Vance.
Barron Trump slipping more memes to his father. You got to love it. I mean, that's my idea of a campaign manager. Let me ask you, though, Chris, is there agreement or disagreement within the campaign about whether Harris Walz is actually the ticket that they are going to face in November?
I think they're pretty confident that's what they're going to be facing. I mean, Donald Trump himself, there's only so much you can do with a guy like Donald Trump. Campaign advisors and consultants find out the hard way, and lawyers too, that they don't actually get to control the principal's action in any kind of a manner. So he has been taking a step back from the campaign trail in a way that is unusual. Certainly his campaign trail schedule in 2020 and 2016 was significantly busier than what he's doing right now. So there may be some doubt there, but the Democrats have wrapped this up. They're not a party that's known for rebellions and coups, really. They're not a party that breaks down in party discipline. Much more than the GOP, they have a top-down structure that you're going to see, I think, in this convention next week when Kamala Harris is nominated. Now, there may be some regret, of course, that the presidential pick that they went with. He's had a pretty rough week. Stolen valor is a really difficult thing to get around. JD Vance was really hitting on that a great deal. But I would assume that this is a ticket that the campaign is facing, and that's the word I get as well.
Chris, as you said, they did unleash JD Vance, and he had a lot of criticisms about Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz. So let's go ahead and take a listen to one of the criticisms that he had for Harris.
Do you believe Kamala Harris is black?
I believe that Kamala Harris is whatever she says she is, but I believe importantly that President Trump is right that she's a chameleon. She pretends to be one thing in front of one audience. She pretends to be something different in front of another audience. She only speaks to voters behind a teleprompter. Everything is scripted. She doesn't have her policy positions out there. And I think that's what President Trump is getting at. This is a fundamentally fake person. She's different depending on who she's in front of.
Chris, your reaction to this one?
I think it's perfect. I mean, that's exactly the kind of strategy that Republicans ought to have been going for. I mean, Donald Trump says things that normal politicians can't. This is famous. My favorite thing he ever did was when he was running against Ben Carson in 2016, an absolutely world famous name in the history books, brain surgeon, and a gentle Christian speaker. The two attacks he went on him were maybe not a good doctor and possibly a violent sociopath. Donald Trump attacks people in places you might not expect. He went at Harris in a way that a lot of politicians would not, and probably they're not very capable of even defending it. He gave it just basically a bicycle kick, infuriated the press, changed the subject to that. And the smart thing for politicians to do after that is to say, listen, I'm not going to get involved in who's black or who's Indian or who's whatever. But where we are going to talk about is the heart of the issue, which is this woman is fraudulent. This person is, as Joe Biden reportedly said in a book that's been reported out by two senior political people, he doesn't think that Kamala Harris knows who she is or who she wants to be, which is a very strange thing for a woman who's at the absolute top of her career in the second half of her life to not know where you want. We're not talking about a college student here. This is the kind of thing that he should have been doing in the first place. JD Vance is a punchy candidate, someone who proved during a really vicious Republican primary that he ended up winning, and then a difficult Republican Senate race they ended up winning, that he's actually capable of wandering into the lion's den. And that this was the first time he really went off of Fox. I'm just glad for the campaign that they're finally getting him out there in the way that he shines.
You mentioned Tim Walz's stolen valor issue this week, said he had a rough week. Well, there's more there, too, and I just want to give at least a minute to that. Allegations swirling around sort of his prior conduct as a high school coach and sort of what he was doing with the kids that he was taking with him to China, the repeated China trips. Some influencers like Mike Cernovich in the X space saying there's a lot more really gnarly stuff to drop, and then more mainstream politicians saying, I think was it Ron DeSantis who said Walz's days are numbered as a member of the ticket. What's going on here?
There's always going to be worries about that. It goes all. I mean, famously, Richard Nixon was supposedly almost kicked off the ticket. This is a sort of thing that campaign operatives wish that they could do. I don't think that he's going to be kicked off the ticket, but I think that he's got a lot of vulnerabilities. I mean, Kamala Harris's main problem is she doesn't actually have her pick of the litter. There's a lot of folks who have difficult times speaking with her or talking to her. The way that she's succeeding right now as a campaign, which is still a possible strategy toward victory, is that the press has gone full bore on propaganda, trying to make her out to be some kind of transformative figure, when we know that these are the same reporters who for the last 4 years have thought that she didn't even deserve covering. They're trying to remake all that. Walz is someone who they kind of got pushed towards. You're not going to get Gavin Newsom on that ticket. Reportedly, Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, didn't even want to be on that ticket, although I haven't been able to confirm that personally, that there may have been pullback from his own campaign after meeting with Harris. So they ended up with Walz. And Walz has been pretending that he was a soldier in combat now for over a decade. They're walking back some of this, pretending it was a mistake. Walz has also been someone who, as you pointed out in China, might as well be a time traveler from 2005, saying that if we just allow American corporations to get richer and richer and richer using Chinese slave labor and undercutting the American economy, then that will somehow be good for democracy. It's a completely demonstrably false point. It's been proven false. And more than that, Kamala Harris's campaign defense strategists seem to have worrying ties increasingly to China. People who want to push a more open China policy, that said that China is not a natural enemy or not a threat to the United States. This is going to be something that is going to give a lot of openings to Donald Trump, who famously in 2016 made China a major thing on his campaign. And I think it'll be a weakness for the Harris campaign.
Chris, let's end this on a good note because Donald Trump posted on X for the first time since 2021. Now, his first campaign, they were both campaign ads that he posted the first time when he came back this morning. So let's take a look at one of those campaign ads.
This is the final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, and fascists. We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media, and we will liberate America from these villains once and for all.
So, Chris, one, it's free. And we were talking about Trump campaign not spending a ton of money early on. But two, everybody is going to be talking about Trump and the return. So what do you make of this today?
Well, I tied very closely to his announcement just before that he was going to be appearing with Elon Musk at an event. I mean, Musk has a strong interest in him returning to the platform. But also bodes well for those folks who are concerned that Donald Trump runs on ideas this time, as opposed to in 2020 when he ran more on Donald Trump. In order to go back to X, it kind of signifies that he's separating himself from Truth Social, which has not been a great success by any means, and is willing to just do whatever he can to reach people. And that campaign ad is kind of similar to some of the themes that you heard in 2016, but even more refined based on the experience of his 4 years in the White House, being consistently undercut by deep state and assets, by the intelligence community, by members of his own party. It seems like it's more aware. So it's a positive sign. And, you know, you don't actually need to spend a ton of money to help a campaign ad go viral. You need to spend money to reach people who are just more passively tuning into television, which is a lot of voters, especially a lot of older voters. But you only really need to air an ad one time to get news stories to write about it. You need to get a viral moment on Twitter to get it to be sent around in text messages. And that's a smart strategy to pursue in the meantime.
Chris Bedford, we're so happy to have you back. Thanks for joining us again.
Great to be back.
All right, when we come back, I'll be asking the man next to me, could artificial intelligence be taking your job? We'll weigh in on the doom and gloom predicted by a Wall Street executive. Don't go anywhere. A top Wall Street exec recently predicted that artificial intelligence could render jobs such as cashiers and drivers obsolete, leading to widespread social unrest. So, James Poulos, this has been a talking point for AI, against AI, for years. So, are human beings finally going to become obsolete, or do we still have a fighting chance here?
Hey, we can decide at any time to just give up, pack it in. Humanity, it's a lot of work. Sometimes it hurts, you know, like we never feel like we get our due. Just don't get out of bed. Don't have kids. Don't go on dates. I mean, you see stuff like this happening in South Korea. And
this is not what people need on a Monday, James.
No, I'm not saying that you should choose that. But look, if we have the power as human beings to bring an end to humanity, we can blow ourselves up. We can stay in bed forever. It's up to us whether the robots replace us. And if there are people at the top who are making these big decisions, taking these big swings on AI, you know, it always cracks me up when these futurists make these crazy predictions that, it's so over for you, ordinary person. Well, who are they to say, right? And so what we really have to ask ourselves is who's in control of the research and development process for these high-end technologies? And why don't the people have a say? And people do need a say. And when they do have a say, guess what? We're going to have technology that can advance and that can improve, but it's not going to replace us because that's suicidal. And we're not supposed to want to be suicidal.
No,
right?
And in the article, it does say millions of people could be out of jobs. So who's to retrain all of these people? So if we do let the robots come in, if that's the, choose your own adventure, if this is what we're choosing, then what does a society look like? And again, we know that they're trying to get universal basic income and everything pushed towards that anyway. But what would we be dealing with at this point?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, look, there are a lot of people out there right now who are so just kind of bowled over by just the difficulties of everyday life, especially since COVID, who are bowled over with uncertainty. You know, it's like you're running from fortune teller to fortune teller in the village, trying to get the truth about what's going to happen to us. You know, that is a recipe for exhaustion and despair and the temptation to just like surrender to someone's illusion, whichever person is kind of selling you the most all-consuming illusion for the cheapest price. And I think a lot of people are going to choose that option. They're going to choose the Matrix. And so for those of us who, for whatever reason, be it spiritual or religious or something else, just refuse to go down that road, and it's a very dark road, for those of us who are left, we've got some decisions to make about what we're going to do with our lives. So it's going to be a split. It's going to be a fork in the road, and it's going to make for some, we're really going to see kind of who has the mettle as human beings to go on living real lives.
Do you use AI?
Not knowingly.
Not knowingly.
No.
Interesting.
Well, they're integrating it into search now.
Yeah.
So even
it's your Google searches pop it up automatically now.
Yeah, and a lot of it's garbage. I mean, it's still pretty bad. And you can look at the memes and the screenshots of people who put stuff in, and they see, Google's telling you, giving you bad life advice and bad instructions. So it's, I'm not saying AI is evil. It's always an issue of who are the people behind the tools, and that's what'll tell you how you should treat the tools.
Yeah. Last week I was just looking up for a segment, an old book that I remembered, and tried to just say, okay, let me look it up and see the details again. And AI automatically put out a quick little blurb about it, right? Like the Cliff Notes version, if you will. And I was like, oh, well, that was pretty helpful, James.
Hey, look, there are plenty of things in our lives where we all wish that we had a little bit of help.
Yeah.
And there's that temptation to chase after the perfection, the ideal, the fantasy, where everything goes just the way you like it. It used to be that only Hollywood sort of presented people with this fantasy that made that, really figured out what they really wanted to see and delivered that for them. Well, now we've got armies of bots, programs, algorithms that do a much more effective job of really penetrating into our secret hearts to figure out just what it is that, gets us off, makes us spend the money, makes us bow before the robots. We have to show some spiritual mettle in not completely, slipping into a mode where I'll just have one cookie from the cookie jar, that'll be fine, and then you turn around and the cookie jar's empty.
Listen, I watch Glenn Beck too, so I know that he is scared that we are going to go down the path that at some point, right, it's just going to take over everything. But how do we just get that like Goldilocks level, James? How do we just get that perfect amount where we still get benefits from this, but the robots aren't in charge of everything?
Well, we got to remember that heaven is not a place on earth. But on the other hand, this is something that we just have to struggle about. This is what politics is these days. And if you don't have ordinary people, not just making decisions about these technologies, but actually using them. One of the challenges about AI is what can you use it for? Can you just use it to make your life easier, to reduce your agency in this world? Or can you use it to, do the kinds of things that ordinary people can do with Bitcoin if they spend a few minutes sort of figuring it out? Not just trying to get rich, but using it to build stuff on, to create markets, to exchange goods and services, use it as a sort of peer-to-peer cash. That's the kind of stuff where technology allows the spirit that moves through us to move through society as a whole. And that's the lifeblood of American commerce. And I think that's not going to change.
One of the things that I think we'll have to delve into more is every time you do an AI search, it uses like 10 times as much power as it does to just use a Google search. So that's going to become an issue real soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. People want to put us on UBI. They want to meter our energy usage, and I'm sure they want to meter our computer usage too. So we need a Second Amendment for compute. This belongs to us too, and we shouldn't be afraid to stand up for it the way we stand up for the right to guns.
But don't worry, once they get us all in EVs, then they can turn those off, and then they can turn our computers off, and then they own us, James.
From the EVs to the IVs.
That's what it's going to do. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be back to break it all down tomorrow.